Hello and welcome to the Crystal Podcast on iCode Media. Today I had a great conversation with Evon Mendrin, who is a financial advisor, and we talked about the different nuances of debt snowballs, debt avalanches, how to look at debt, how to sort of enter a practice and figure out what your gives and takes are, what the benefits and drawbacks are of each different type of buying into a practice, planning to buy into a practice, selling a practice. It was a lot of fun for me. I hope you enjoy our conversation. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us.
You know, I get questions all the time about how do we use 9.2 codes and 9.9 codes and which ICD codes go with different CPT codes and what can be billed together and what can't. And this confusion, this uncertainty really holds us back oftentimes to be able to do what we want to do, which is help our patients see clearly and provide their best opportunity for a lifelong vision. And so we built iCode Education for that specific purpose. We have lots of resources that are based in helping you understand disease states, helping you understand revenue cycles and billing and coding practices. So check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. And we have a specific bundle there for you if you'd like to take advantage of it. It's the Premier Billing and Coding Bundle. We've got a 10% discount code just for listeners of this show. You can just enter the coupon code at checkout. You can enter in iCode Media 22. That's EYECODEMEDIA 22 at checkout. We'd love to have you. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. One of the challenging things with patients is when they invest in a really high quality pair of glasses and customized lenses, it can be challenging to keep those lenses clean, keep them scratch-free, smudge-free. And so we now have the ability with Crizal Sapphire HR lenses to offer our patients the best-in-class anti-reflective coating in a way that is really high resistance so that they're not having to care for their lenses as much as when those lenses are caring for them. So remember that you can provide patients that best-in-quality, best-in-class transparency, clarity, durability, and UV protection in a single Crizal coating. If you want to learn more about Crizal Sapphire HR, contact your Essilor account executive or visit essilorpro.com/Crizal.
Generally, I don't ever know where these conversations are going to go. I know that we kind of had a little bit of the last episode that I did with Adam was related to private equity. And private equity generally is kind of like a topic that keeps seeming to come up and people are quite interested in it. The comment that I made, I think the whole part about that discussion with Adam and I was that, I think most ODs aren't aware of that. You had a really astute comment today about the fact that this is sort of how these firms work in general. But I don't think most people know that. What's your thought about that?
So I after seeing your comment, I thought about it a little bit more, and it's different. It's a little bit weird when you are the investment, right?
Yes.
Like you are the fund's investment. And I can totally see how you don't really connect it to like your buyer is really this fund that's pulling in funds from other people and is managing those funds, and you're just the investment. Like you are that target, so to speak. So I can totally see why people don't connect it that way, because it's their position is a lot different than if I were just to pull up some ABC mutual fund and invest in that mutual fund.
Yeah, because like for me, if I were going to work with you, or with another. So in general, if I'm investing, it's common, right? That's why when I made that comment of 2 and 20, this is just a common practice when you're talking about mutual funds or a firm that's managing a bunch of different investments for different people. Is that right?
Well, with that specific fee structure, that's more for the hedge fund and apparently the private equity fund space.
Yeah.
If you pull up like a publicly traded mutual fund, there's an expense ratio, but it's really just that set expense ratio. There's no 2% plus an extra performance fee. It's just that's what it is. But with the private equity / hedge fund world, it's they're adding on an additional layer of fees to go along with that.
And that's why it sort of, when you kind of uncover that, or when I started thinking about that, and you said it so well, to me, it seems like they're just sucking wealth. And on the one hand, as business owners, you sort of, healthcare optometry is a challenging business because you are taking care of people. Certainly, we wouldn't do this if we didn't make money, right? Maybe we may do it if we didn't need money, right? Like we might help people because we don't need money. But if it was a losing venture where you lose money in taking care of people, you wouldn't do it. So obviously, it's a profit center for a human being and a family on one side of it. But it's still, the thing that seems crazy about it is that, and yes, we pull wealth out of that business to support our families. But the thing that, just like you said, seems so different about it is that you become the investment. And then, and I want to hear your advice to doctors, but then if somebody else sees that I'm an investment worthy of coming and dumping extra money into to try to get money out, wouldn't I think that I'm a very good investment as well? Like, what do you say to that, to a doctor that's kind of trying to figure out what to do financially with their practice?
Yeah, in general, I mean, if I were a seller, or if I were an advisor to a seller, I would be happy that there is another buyer at the table. I would be happy that there is an expanded market for my business, right? Especially one that has a higher ability to pay. Even if you don't get a higher price, they have a higher ability to pay. So I would be happy about that. And you have a lot of things to weigh if you are selling a business like that. You have, first and foremost, like, what is your responsibility to your family and your own financial independence? Like, what does that look like? Because you've built this tremendous asset, and hopefully it should be serving your ideal life and your financial goals. So that's one thing that basically I would say that's the first thing you need to think about. But you're also the steward of this business, and this business serves the team that's involved in the business. This business serves the patients, right? So you have these other parties involved, these other stakeholders that you also need to think about as the steward. And that's where it really gets to be a much more of a complicated decision than just what is the highest price. I think what's really important, though, as practice owners prepare for that, is that you want to have options. When you get to that position and you're ready to exit your practice, because everyone will exit their business, me, you, everybody, you want to have optionality. You want to have the ability to say, I will sell to this buyer or to this buyer. And the way you do that is by creating good habits while you are in the practice, creating a good, healthy business, reinvesting to the business when you need to, and then also reinvesting out of the business too. And as you do that, as you build wealth in and out of the business, you're able to give yourself optionality when it comes down to selling the practice, because now you don't have to chase a certain dollar amount in order to make a retirement or a next phase of your life financially feasible. Then you've got some options there. Did that help? Was that what you're looking for?
No. Yeah, I think, Evon, the challenging part for a lot of us is, immediately is just, if you're not inside doing that. I mean, there's a couple things. The first thing is that if you're not inside, like, thinking about the sale in the long term of your practice, or even in the short term of your practice, it's hard to see what goes on specifically with that doctor. And I've said this a number of times. People are probably tired of hearing me say it, but I can't blame an individual doctor for selling to anybody, like selling to private equity, selling to, I can see if you want to transition out of your practice, there's got to be a way to transition out of your practice. I had a doctor email me yesterday. I get a number of the emails, like, on a daily basis about doctors who are my age, maybe a little bit older, so early 40s, maybe a little bit older, mid 40s, late 40s, maybe a little younger, mid 30s. They've been around in the profession long enough to build a pretty significant practice that's generating significant wealth for their family over time. And they really are having a hard time finding new graduates and new doctors. And so what one of the things he said, and I'm gonna point this out. I'm gonna have him on the podcast, hopefully to discuss this. But the whole thing, and this is where I think your perspective comes in a lot, is he's talking about, look, I know a number of independent, they own their own businesses, optometrists that make 350. This was his comment. They make 350,000 plus a year, and we cannot find people to come into our practices to grow them, to buy out, because they are in smaller towns or et cetera, et cetera. And so I think a lot of times we, as optometrists, we're humble. We don't come out and lead. So he wanted to go back and talk to his school that he graduated from, talk to another school to try to encourage these students to come out and realize this is a really, a potentially quite lucrative profession. And you don't have to be commanded by somebody else. So in any case, my thoughts on all of this, and one of the things I think that's very helpful to have financial advisors like yourself on, is, when you do own your own practice, or you're working toward that, there becomes these really significant plays that you can make from a tax standpoint, from an investment standpoint, that allow you much greater flexibility than you can obtain with just this straight salary W-2 employment. That is really hard, I think, to wrap your mind around as a student. What's your advice to new graduates, young doctors coming out, where they're wondering about how to navigate all of this?
Yeah, how to navigate those decisions around whether to or whether to not get into practice ownership?
Yeah, I think you can. So if you're coming out of, the hard part is a lot of the mismatch is the private practice doctor is trying to come to the table with some number that is less than maybe a corporation can offer this other person. And they're trying to bridge that gap. And I think on the one hand, we got to try to bring those private practice docs up to pay more. On the other hand, we got to have the new graduates and students understand that you can live in a smaller town, maybe an hour outside of the big place you want to live, 2 hours outside of it. Maybe you're not going to make quite as much, but you don't need it. But the fact is in 5 years or 10 years, the amount potential is so much greater. How would you advise somebody on those decisions?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors here. There's what does that student or recent graduate want out of their career? Do they want to get into private practice? Do they not want to? Where do they want to live? Do they want to live in an urban setting? Do they want to live in a rural setting? Where do they see themselves eventually raising a family? There's all these different factors at play here. Think about, I guess the first thing I would say is think about what is most important to you. Is it practice ownership or is it not? Because like you said, one of these great opportunities for practice ownership can come from these practices that may not be located in a major city, or in some place that's most desirable to live, but can still provide for a great fulfilling business opportunity, a great fulfilling practice career, and can be financially lucrative. And there's trade-offs to everything. You can't have everything you want. Unfortunately, that's just a part of life. So you just got to think about what is most important to you in terms of your career goals, your financial goals, your family goals, and try to find the best compromise between all those different things. Unfortunately, I don't know that that's the tip, that maybe you were looking for, but that's a tough decision because there's a lot of different factors. Money is a part of it, but money is not the, math of something isn't the only thing that's going to be coming into these decisions. A lot of it's going to be based around family and personal values as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. The kind of underscoring theme, however, that I think the two things that I see when I talk to doctors, and I've talked to doctors that have been in what I would call big cities on the West Coast, the East Coast. They're maybe just outside of the LA, but they're still really big cities, and they're really big practices, and they can't find young doctors. So what I'm trying to figure out is how do we bridge that gap, and what are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about as practice owners to kind of have those conversations. And obviously that may not come directly from you, but from a financial advice standpoint, when you're counseling somebody about their practice or about their financial decisions, kind of what would that process look like when, a new graduate comes and says, look, I've got $250,000 of debt. And Evon, I want to work with you. I want to have a strategy where I get to be able to have some flexibility, have some say in the future. Maybe they don't know they want a private practice, they want corporate practice, but like what kinds of things do they need to be thinking about now? And what kinds of things do we need to be thinking about as practice owners to try to get them to that path where they can start seeing our practice as that future or vision for themselves? What are the financial aspects of that?
Got it. Okay, so from a young optometrist perspective, thinking about maybe one day they'll get into private practice, but they really just want to build some flexibility into their life. Student loans are a huge part of that. I mean, it's the big thing that they're going to face as soon as they graduate. It can bring down someone's risk tolerance because they see this huge debt that they're going to have to tackle right away. Think about your time horizon. So if you are considering getting into, if you're pretty certain that you're going to want to at least explore getting into private practice ownership, there's a few ways for you to build some liquidity into your life or build some flexibility into your life. One of the ways is just tackling that debt head on. And you see this a lot. Trying to tackle that debt as soon as possible, just get it off your balance sheet and you can create a whole lot of financial flexibility. But that's a tough road. You're talking about living pretty frugally. You're talking about increasing your income whatever way you can, working extra days in other practices, whatever side hustles, whatever it is. So that's a very rigid, you need to be very intentional about that road, but it absolutely can be done. But it starts with thinking about, what are your priorities? Because you may have other priorities kicking in too. You may already have a family that's going to demand a certain standard of living or certain things from you. Or maybe you're single and you have other less responsibilities outside of just tackling some of these initial things. So you think about what your priorities are and what are the other things demanding time and energy and money from you in your life.
When you think about, Evon, kind of those strategies right away. So I come to you, $250,000 in debt. I give you that same story. And my priority is that I want to have private practice ownership in the future. What are the sort of things that you have me do? Like, tell me, how do we strategize on how to reduce that debt and tackle that debt and be more flexible? What can I do? Like, let's have this conversation. What are the things you need to know from me? What are the things that I can do right now to be flexible in 5 years?
Yeah, really that comes down to immediate cash flow, right? What is your income right now versus your expenses? How do we increase that gap so that we can throw as much money, if this is the way you want to go, into tackling that debt quickly? How do we increase that gap between what you're spending and what you're earning? That's number one. And again, that really comes down to, okay, can we minimize expenses that are not valuable to you? Can we increase your income in any way possible? And can we shovel as much money as reasonably possible into that debt to tackle it? And you can project this out. You can look at different schedules in terms of how much you're paying into it and how quickly that debt will be paid off. So that really is number one, is about cash flow. What are we earning? What are we spending money on? Are there things that are going to come up in the near future that we need to plan for as well? It's really just about really getting clear on cash flow and trying to be intentional about where your money is going as much as possible. Now, there's another direction you can go, depending on how much debt versus your income you're talking about. For example, income-driven repayment plans, if you're looking at the federal student loan system, income-driven repayment plans can be a viable stepping stone, even if it's not a permanent solution, but that can be a viable stepping stone to give you some cash flow flexibility. And especially if you are, for example, to cold start a practice and your income's going to decline right in that year you're doing that, that can be a stepping stone to get you into practice ownership. And then as your cash flow increases, as the practice is getting more sustainable, then you can start to more aggressively tackle that debt.
Yeah. So then So in your mind, when you're tackling debt, so are you lining things up in terms of like what's your basic strategy? Are you saying what's the highest interest rates first? Do you go with the lowest dollar amount first? How do you like to structure people tackling that debt?
Yeah, so I guess there's two things to look at. If there's student loans, which there will be, so let's just say while there's student loans, I want to look at what is the best way to tackle those student loans. Is it going to be tackling it down as quickly as possible, as quickly as reasonably possible with some balance there? Or is it going to be going for some sort of longer term forgiveness? Because there are debt levels that are high enough versus your income where that will make sense. Or are there other things coming up like we're talking about practice ownership that you may want to just increase your flexibility. So the first thing is to figure out, okay, what is the best approach for this student debt? If it's to tackle it as soon as possible, then it's just another debt on the balance sheet, right? So now we're talking about what is the best way to put, which debt do you want to tackle first and then move on to the next and to the next. And that's where I'm looking at the debt avalanche. So I'm looking at what is the highest interest rate debt first. Let's pay minimums on the others, or restructure them, maybe refinance them to a longer length if we can, so that we can put as much as possible into that higher interest rate debt. And then we take that amount, put it into the next one, that amount, put it into the next one. I want to tackle the highest interest rate first.
Yeah, you call that an avalanche, which is different than a snowball. Can you explain the differences between them?
Yeah, so the other approach, commonly called like the snowball method, is that you're paying off the lowest balance first, and then once that lowest balance is paid off, then you want to tackle the next lowest balance, and then the next one, and then the next one. And throughout that whole process, you're taking all of those payments and adding it to the next one, and then all of those payments and adding it to the next one. The benefit there is really it's psychological. Like you're feeling the progress sooner when you're tackling the lowest balance first. You're seeing that progress sooner. From the pure math perspective, you want to tackle that highest interest rate first.
Yeah, and so the Dave Ramseys of the world would say, but Evon, you don't understand psychology, the psychological aspects of humans, and so you got to do the debt snowball. And you're saying no, but the math makes more sense to do the avalanche. So how do you compel? What are the reward systems that people get to put in place so that the avalanche triggers that same reward or a similar reward or at least some reward, so that they are compelled to continue to do it with debt that may be larger in total, but mathematically it's still better? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, and that's different for everyone. So that's a great point. I mean, psychology, emotion, values, all of this other intangible stuff absolutely plays into financial decisions, especially around debt. But I want to start with what does the math say, and then how do we find the best compromise between those two? So I think what's important here is building in benchmarks, right? So building in, okay, we're going to pay off $10,000 of debt, and then we're going to celebrate in this way. And I've seen a lot of examples about this. I mean, there are so many. It really is personal to like, what do you need in order to motivate you to get to that next step? I love just building in benchmarks though. I mean, you can make it whatever way you want. I like debt balances. You can start with, okay, we're going to pay off the first 10,000 or something like that. And then we're going to celebrate in this way, in whatever way is important to you. Go out to dinner with your wife, whatever that is. Figure out what that thing is that's going to motivate you. Have a vision board, make it tangible if you need. Like there's a lot of ways to make it really personal. That's where the fun comes in, because you can figure out what motivates you. But just start to make those benchmarks. Look at the road ahead. Figure out what debts you need to pay off and in what order, and then put some benchmarks in there. And this is your celebration benchmark. This is what you're going to do.
So to me, I'll disclose this. You may know this already from my podcast if you have ever listened to it. But when I got out of school in 2008, I had about $110,000 of student loans. 10 of that was from my wife's undergrad. The rest of it was from optometry school. And I don't know when this happened. It must have been, so when the comment I made, I remember in my practice management course telling one of my buddies, so our practice management professor, he was talking about investment strategies and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I don't have any idea on investment strategies. I just want to pay somebody to tell me what to do, you know? And so I got done with school and then he said, yeah, I'm the kind of same way. It doesn't mean I don't want to understand it. It just means that like, I'm not an expert, you know, just like patients aren't going to come to me and I'm going to just equivocally tell them all their different options. I might tell them all their options, but I'm going to say, based on your case and my understanding of what your problems are, we're going to, this is my primary recommendation. This is what we're going to do right now. This is what we must do. This is what we should do. Those sorts of things. And so that was my point. And so what spoke to me was I didn't have like a financial advisor right away. Actually, I got connected with a guy that sold me a bunch of whole life insurance. And well, I think there's probably a mechanism for that. At that time in my life, there wasn't a need for it. I mean, my perspective was I was overpaying for what I needed at that time. And so it really turned me off to, you know, it turned me off to that process. And so I didn't have anybody guiding me through it. And so about a half year into my practice or being out of school, I must have encountered Dave Ramsey. And I was like, look, we're going to Dave Ramsey this sucker. And so what was easy for me is I didn't have somebody like Evon to tell me, hey, Chris, let's do this. Let's build in some wins. I had a quote unquote financial advisor who had just sold me whole life insurance. And then I find this other guy online and I kind of whittle down all this other stuff and figure it out on my own. And then realize, hey, I don't want whole life insurance. Hey, buddy, get me out of whole life insurance. I want to make it term life and do all those sorts of things. And now I have a financial advisor that I do trust. And so, it was the psychological aspect of the debt snowball that was so helpful. But what you're saying is if I have an Evon right out of school, first of all, then I can have somebody do the math for me. It's probably smarter to look at the numbers. Well, it's definitely smarter to look at the numbers, but then also help me figure out what that process is going to look like and when those rewards are going to be built in so I can avalanche it as opposed to snowball it. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Start with the math. And look, I'm a fan of systems that will help you do stuff, that will help you get to the next level. If it's the snowball method that gets you there, great. Like I'm not going to fight against that. From my perspective, I want though to start with the math and say, okay, based on this, what is the best decision for you? And you can absolutely do that with the avalanche method, paying off even if it's the highest balance first. But you have to build in those reward systems. You have to build in those checkpoints that tell you, okay, I've made progress, and this is what I'm going to do to celebrate that progress.
Today, I want to talk about the MyDay multifocal for just a second. It has been a really great thing in our practice for our patients who are presbyopes of all areas, but you know, those tricky presbyopes are always the ones that are kind of emerging, where they don't want to give up any of their faraway vision, but they're having some struggles up close. And so what the MyDay multifocal has been able to do for us is to allow those patients to transition into a multifocal more easily. And then as we have those patients progress into other levels where they need more ad powers, it's been a nice smooth transition. So the ultimate hurdle that we've seen in our practice before the MyDay multifocal was that we'd have patients who would resist any transition to a multifocal lens because of that distance blur. We just haven't seen that. So if you haven't started using MyDay multifocal in your practice, I would encourage you to start, check it out, reach out to your Cooper reps for those trial lenses and commit to MyDay multifocal for your patients. I think they're going to like it. If you haven't checked out MacuHealth yet for your patients in Category 1 through Category 4, I think there's a lot of evidence that you should be considering. The first is, if we just look at AREDS 2 and what they talk about, MacuHealth is, so for patients in Category 3 and Category 4 AMD, MacuHealth is a great option for them that follows that entire protocol, and it also adds mesozeaxanthine to the mix, which, if you look at some of the evidence, I believe shows me that it's going to thicken the macular pigment better than without mesozeaxanthine. It also uses a correct AREDS 2 dose of zinc at 25 milligrams. And so you don't have to worry so much about the potential side effects of zinc. The other thing to think about, and it's beyond the scope of this, although you've probably heard me talk on other podcasts, is that in patients in category 1 and 2, there may be some additional benefit to supplementing them with something that may be a little bit less than the AREDS 2, so you don't have to add as much to it. And that's where I use the MacuHealth LMZ3. And so I think if you haven't done this yet, I'd consider MacuHealth in your practice and for your patients. And it's been great for my patients, and we really feel like we can have the ability to help those patients in all categories of macular degeneration.
I mean, that's an unfortunate reality of what financial services has been for forever. You know, my earliest years in this profession were in the product sales world, so I'm very familiar with that. And it's difficult for the consumers in general, especially optometrists, to figure out who's trustworthy, who to best work there, who to best work with. That's just an unfortunate reality there.
Well, Evon, certainly I'm not totally throwing, I probably did too much. I'm not intentionally throwing that guy under the bus. I'm just saying that, like, you know, I didn't know much, you know, at that time. Yeah. And so, but my sense is there's probably some reason to have, at some point, there's probably some reason that whole life does make more sense for different tax purposes, et cetera. Maybe not. I don't know, but there's probably a mechanism for some of those products that work for some people. Is that correct?
There is a certain list of situations where something like that makes sense. It's just a product, and every product has a fit. For the vast majority of cases where I see it sold, not really. You know, I don't know. It's always in the best interest of that person buying it. But there are definitely every tool has a fit. There are some limited situations where that makes sense.
Well, one example might be is if you were like, let me bounce this off of you. So let's say that as I've thought about this, I'm wondering, like, these examples where that might be the case, where like some sort of whole life policy, some sort of life insurance policy might be a mechanism where that could help you over time, would be if you've already maxed out like all of your solo 401ks, you've maxed out every single benefit to delay the taxes on that money over time, right? So to defer the taxes over time. And then you could have the ability to somehow purchase that whole life at a lower tax rate than you otherwise would be now, so you can pay taxes on it now at some lower rate than what you are otherwise at. So is that kind of a model that might make sense within whole life? If I'm not trying to throw somebody under the bus always for whole life, that might be a model that would work.
Maybe. So I guess what I'll say in general is that the first thing you need to figure out with all these decisions is I see these things separately. I see, on the one hand, you need to manage risks, and on the other hand, you want to invest. So on the one hand, you want to manage these financial risks in your life as best as you can, as efficiently as you can. Whole life's usually not going to do that for you, for the most part. For example, term life insurance is a fantastic tool to do that, to just manage that risk in your life. On the other hand, investing, you want to invest as prudently and as efficiently as you can, right? So these are two separate things. Once you're going to combine them, there needs to be a very specific reason to do that. One reason that a policy like whole life insurance or universal life insurance, any permanent life insurance makes sense is if there is a permanent insurance need. You can argue there's never a true permanent insurance need, but for example, if there are an extremely wealthy family facing estate planning or estate tax issues, or if you have a special needs child and you know that you want to fund a certain amount for them in a special needs trust or something like that at the end of your life. So there are certain cases where you may have a permanent risk, a permanent insurance need. Okay, if you want to combine it and now look at it as a sort of savings vehicle or investment vehicle, you got to be really intentional about where that fits in with all of your other investments, because
right.
Yes, that cash value is not going to be taxed along the way, technically. Yes, you can take loans from it. And that loan value is not going to be taxed against you. But that's also the case with any debt you take from against any asset. There's no magic there. And really the when you look at a whole life policy, like the growth there is going to be similar to like bonds over the long term. Like it's not a comparison for something like more aggressive investments like the stock portion of a portfolio or like your practice or real estate even. It's more of a comparison to something more conservative like the bond chunk of your portfolio, the more stable stuff. So that's really what you need to compare it to. There are like academic research papers that will show you that something like a life insurance policy can fit in with a retirement plan because you can pull from a life insurance policy when markets decline and different things like that. It's really academic, and I'm not sure how effective that is in practice. I've not seen it done well in practice. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure someone listening to this is going to say, hey, I have it and I'm doing it. Great. But it's just a lot of it's more academic than in reality.
I think that's a great conversation. No, I think it's a great conversation about what I was trying to do is just not throw, obviously I had a bad experience with it. I'm trying to kind of find other avenues where it could make sense. Yeah. I think the other side of that is that, it kind of brought up you transitioning where these things kind of work for you. And so, we talked about, you come out of school, and I don't know, maybe I'm different, but what we've talked about so far is like getting out of debt, right? Getting out of that debt, getting everything gone. And then does that ever change where as you become a practice owner from your philosophy where, okay, well, I might want to buy a house. I might need to buy out the partner, the existing partner of the practice. And then you take on debt. And so I'll tell you, I'll bring my story into it. So, the only debt I have right now is my home loan, which is paid off in 2 years to 3 years. And then I had to buy my dad out at the end of the last year. So we were 50-50 owners. I was able to buy in small chunks over the last 10 years. I've been out of school for 14 years. And since a little bit longer than that. So from 2010 to about 2020, I was buying into that 50%. So I was paying them over time. Well, then, at the end of last year, my dad decided he wanted to be done and retire by July of this year. So I bought him out. And so then there's this piece of you where you're kind of like, well, I could take all this money that I've saved and invested and then shift it over and pay him, and then it's gone. I didn't do that. I basically took out a loan, 70-30 loan. So I got financing for 70%. I paid him 30% of the remaining 50%. And now I have this debt on the business, essentially. I mean, it's on me, but it's on the business. And so so how do you look at that kind of debt? Like, so is that bad debt? I mean, obviously bad is not the right term, but we've worked so hard to get out of debt. And then we've kind of gotten back in there. At some point, does this avalanche or snowball always work for everybody? How do you view that?
No. So debt is not inherently good or bad, is my take. Debt is just a source of money. It's just a source of capital. And it can be imprudently used, or it can be prudently used. It can be productive debt, meaning you're investing in an asset. I would argue your education is an asset. Or it can be unproductive, credit card debt, buying stuff, all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't look at your life goal to be debt-free forever at any cost. I think it's prudent to try to pay down debt as reasonably quickly as you can, but it's also useful and it's okay to take on debt for opportunities like buying into a practice. If you are taking on debt that's at a reasonable cost, meaning the interest rate is not extreme, it fits within your cash flow, so it's not going to cause too much stress in your life in terms of your cash flow goes. You're not stretching yourself too thin, and it's potentially tax deductible. If it's in the practice, maybe that interest is tax deductible. And it's going towards something that productive, I don't see that as a negative. I mean, debt is going to ebb and flow throughout your life. You're going to buy a house. You're going to pay that down over time. You may pull out money to refinance for something. Maybe you take a home equity line of credit for an upgrade on the house. Maybe you take out practice debt. Like, debt will ebb and flow over time. You do want to manage that as best as you can. You do want to keep a careful eye on how much of your cash flow is going to debt payments. But it's not a bad thing where you need to be constantly denying debt at every stage in your life.
What kind of things would you, so again, I feel like, I've got financial advisors and I've got attorneys and tax guys that I talk to about this all the time. Sometimes, Yvonne, it kind of comes down to like, you just sort of have to pick one, right? Like, you just sort of have to say,
trade-offs.
I understand all of this. Yeah, I understand the trade-offs, the benefits and drawbacks. I'm not going to go back and forth and kind of, wring my hands over this. It's like, look, on the practice, I've got 4.5 years left at 5.5% interest. Part of me, the Dave Ramsey that laid eggs in my brain 12 years ago, makes me look at that and like, I got to get rid of it. I got to get rid of it. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to be able to find cheaper money right now than 5.5% if I were going to, and so anyway, so tell me about that. How do you get to that point of helping somebody say, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stick to it. We can rethink it at some strategic points, but like, you got to stick to it. How do you do that?
Everything's about trade-offs. Every cash flow decision is about trade-offs. You have to think about, okay, if you're going to pay extra into something, what opportunities are you missing out on? There's an opportunity cost. I like to look at cash flow as what percentage of your cash flow is going to certain buckets. So I want to look at how much of it's going to spending, how much of it's going to debt to income ratio, your debt rate, how much of it is going to saving and investing, how much of it is going to taxes. And as long as I feel like those ranges, I look at it in terms of percentages, like what percentage of your cash flow. So as long as those ranges are relatively reasonable, healthy, like I'm okay with a debt payment staying on the cash flow, or your debt staying on the balance sheet. So that's the first thing I want to look at is, okay, what are those scores? Like, what are those percentages? And do I feel like they're within healthy ranges? Another thing is just going back to like, what are your priorities? Like, is it a priority for you to purchase into a practice, or is it a priority to purchase a home? Because if you purchase into the practice, you may need to wait on the house. And if that's fine with you, if that's fine with your family, if that's something you're comfortable with, then that's a trade-off you make. So it's a lot of it really, again, going back to, and this is not like a specific answer, because people are just different. They have different priorities. Totally. People feel different about debt. I mean, family history, values come into debt decisions, risk tolerance. Like, there's so much involved in this that I want to look at those scores. I want to look at it in terms of percentages, but I also want to keep in mind, like, what are your priorities? What are our next things we're planning for, and put your money there first.
Yeah. So I think I think all those things are what's compelling to me about this conversation, just in general, Evon, is that I think, my take home is, first of all, don't make some of the mistakes I made. I think you've got to probably interview a couple different people. I would, I'm not an advisor related to this, but what I've found very helpful is to have people who have a fiduciary responsibility to me, and to our investment goals, and not necessarily to some product. And so what kinds of questions, so I'll kind of give you the last word here. First of all, what kind of questions do you think are questions that new graduates or doctors looking to make the change in terms of advisors that we should be asking an advisor about to kind of get to the heart of how they operate?
Yeah. So I will agree with you there. I think if you're going to look for an advisor, you should find someone that has a fiduciary responsibility to you, and that is not connected to a product sales company or product sales at all. So the industry term is like fee only. If you see someone that's fee only, that's kind of the jargon that we'll use. So some questions to ask. Number one is who do you work with? Number two, what do you do for them? What are your actual services? What does that look like? Is there a service calendar? What does that experience look like? Number three, how are you paid? How do you earn money? You just want to have a good understanding of that. That will tell you if they are fee only, where you're paying them for their services.
Is like a fee base. Like I pay you, you give me advice, and I take your advice.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. You're paying them in some way. The payment is coming from you, the client, to the advisor in some way. There's no third party involved. There's no product sale, commissions, anything like that, right? So how are you paid? How do you receive payment? And there's a few different ways that looks. It could be from assets. It could be from a flat monthly fee. It could be from an hourly, whatever way that you're comfortable paying. So how do you get paid? Do you have a fiduciary responsibility to me? Those are the big questions I would ask.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think, again, you and I are a little bit biased on this, and I think that's okay.
Biased,
I mean,
yes.
we all,
yes.
Yeah, that's okay. Tell everybody where they can find you, and what your podcast is called, where they can find your podcast, get to know you a little bit better, and go ahead.
Yeah, you can always find me on my website, optometrywealth.com. You can learn more about me and my background and my firm and some of the things we do for optometrists nationwide. You can always email me. Feel free to reach out to me by email, Evon, E-V-O-N, @optometrywealth.com. My podcast is the Optometry Money Podcast. Pretty straightforward to the point. You can find that anywhere you find your podcasts. And feel free to reach out to me. Like you said, yes, I clearly have a bias because I run my own business in a fee-only fiduciary manner, but I've worked through all these different business models. I've seen it all. If you have questions about how financial services works in general, just reach out to me. Happy to explain that.
Awesome. Evon Mendrin, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for having me. Take care.